There are men who tell you they saw the whole thing, and what they mean is that they heard about it after and have polished the telling ever since. I am not one of those men. I was in the morning room of the late Queen when the Queen Consort reached for the dog, and I have never once needed to embroider what happened next, because what happened next was the plainest and hardest thing I have witnessed in 51 years of service to the royal house of Harrogate. My name is Osric. For most of my life I have been a kennel-master, which is a grand way of saying that I have spent my mornings with my hands in warm fur and my evenings mending leather. I served the late Queen Isolde from the year she came to Eldermore as a bride until the winter morning she died, and after her death I served her memory, which is heavier work than it sounds. I mention all this so you will understand that I am not a soldier and never was. I could not have done what Corporal Roland Thane did that day. I would not have had the stillness for it, but I was standing close enough to see his face, and I will carry the look of it to my own grave. The dog's name was Bracken. He was a deerhound, gray as a rain cloud with a wash of russet through his beard and along his flanks, and by that winter he was old, 12 years, which is a long life for a hound so large. The late Queen had raised him from a pup that could sit in one of her cupped hands. She used to say she chose him because he was the runt of the litter and looked at her as though he had already decided she belonged to him. When she walked the long gallery, he walked at her left knee, unleashed, matching her pace so exactly that the two of them moved like one creature with a woman's face and a hound's patience. He slept across the foot of her bed. He waited outside the door of every room she entered. When she was ill in her last year and could not walk, he lay with his great gray head on the edge of her couch, and did not eat unless someone carried his bowl to where he could keep his eyes on her. When she died, he did not howl. I had braced myself for howling. Deerhounds can grieve loudly. Bracken did something worse. He went to the door of her rooms and lay down across the threshold, and he stayed there. For 3 days he would not be moved. He took water from my hand and refused everything else. I sat on the cold floor beside him through 2 of those nights, an old man and an old dog keeping a vigil that neither of us had been asked to keep, and I understood then that the Queen had left more of herself in that animal than she had left in any painting or any monument the realm would raise for her. The children understood it too, which is why what came later was so cruel. There were 3 of them who loved him, the king's younger children by the late Queen. Princess Malin, who was 9 that winter and who had the late Queen's exact way of tilting her head when she was thinking. Prince Torin, 11, all elbows and gravity, forever trying to be older than he was. And little Prince Bram, 6, who could not remember his mother's voice anymore and had transferred the whole of his love onto the dog who had known it. Bram used to fall asleep in the kennel straw with his cheek against Bracken's ribs, and I would carry him up to the nursery still smelling of hound, and no one had the heart to bathe him before he woke. To those 3 children, Bracken was not a pet. He was the last warm thing their mother had touched every day. He was a door left open to a room they were not otherwise allowed to enter. The Queen Consort's name was Morwenna, and she had been married to King Alaric for a little under 2 years when this happened. I will try to be fair to her, because bitterness makes a poor witness, and because I have had years now to think about her, and I no longer believe she was simply a wicked woman. She was a woman who could not abide the presence of the woman she had replaced. Isolde was dead, but Isolde was everywhere, in the children's faces, in the portraits, in the way the older servants lowered their voices, in the very furniture which had been chosen by a queen the whole realm had loved, and which Morwenna could not rearrange without someone remarking on it. She was a living queen married to a dead one's shadow, and I think it made her feel like a guest in her own house. That is not an excuse, but it is the soil the whole thing grew from. And the dog was the shadow made flesh. The dog followed the children the way it had once followed their mother. The dog was allowed in rooms Morwenna would have kept dogs out of. The dog wore, still, the collar Isolde had put on him, a broad band of dark green leather with a small silver crest worked into it, the late Queen's own device, a heron rising. Everywhere Morwenna looked in her new home, There was a gray ghost with a dead woman's crest around its throat, loved by children who did not love her. So she decided the dog would go. She did not announce it as a decision. Great households do not work that way, and Morwenna was cleverer than that. It began that winter as a series of small remarks dropped where they would be picked up, that the dog was old and surely suffering, and would it not be a kindness? That the dog was unclean and the children's health must be thought of. That the far kennels beyond the water meadow were where a working hound belonged, not the state apartments. That the animal was, after all, only an animal, and the household had indulged a sentiment past the point of sense. I heard these remarks the way a kennel-master hears everything, sideways and second-hand, and I did not answer them, because it was not my place to answer a queen, and because I was a coward about it, and I have never pretended otherwise. What I did instead was go to the one person in that palace whom I trusted to hold a line I could not hold myself. I went to the guard. Corporal Roland Thane had been assigned to the late Queen's apartments for the last 4 years of her life, and after her death he had asked, which is not a thing a guardsman is supposed to do, to remain on that post, guarding rooms with no one living in them. His request was granted because no one could think of a reason to refuse it, and because a man who wants to guard an empty threshold is not a man you need to watch. He stood his hours in the corridor outside the late Queen's morning room, where her things were kept as she had left them, and where Bracken had taken to sleeping in the square of sun that fell across her writing desk in the late afternoon. Thane was perhaps 35 that winter. He was not a large man for the guard. There were taller and broader in the regiment, but he had a quality of stillness that made you forget to notice his size. When he stood his post, he did not fidget, did not shift his weight, did not let his eyes wander to the windows the way the young ones do. He had a plain, weathered face and pale gray eyes, and when he did look at you it was with an attention so complete that people often mistook it for insolence. He was not insolent. He was simply a man who had decided, somewhere in his life, that he would not spend his attention carelessly, and having decided it, he kept to it the way other men keep to a religion. He and the late Queen had understood each other. I know this because I saw it in the small silent economies of people who share a duty. She never made him speak. He never made her feel watched. Once, in her last summer, when she could no longer manage the garden steps, I saw her put her hand out without looking, knowing he would be there, and he was there, and she went down the steps on the arm of a man who by every rule of the court should have been a piece of furniture to her. Neither of them ever remarked on it. That was the whole of their friendship, and it was more than most people manage in a lifetime of talking. So when I came to him that winter, wringing my old cap in my hands, and told him what I had been hearing about the dog, he listened without a word until I had finished, and then he said only, "She has said this to your face." "No," I admitted. "It comes round to me. You know how it comes round." "Then it is not yet an order," he said. "When it is an order it will come to me." I did not understand him then. I understand him now. He was telling me the shape of the thing before it happened. He was telling me that remarks dropped in corridors were smoke, and that he did not intend to spend himself chasing smoke, but that if a fire was lit, if a plain order was given to remove the late Queen's dog from the late Queen's rooms, then it would have to pass through the doorway he was standing in, and he would be waiting for it there. I went back to my kennels a little comforted and a great deal more afraid, because I had heard something under his flat words that I had not expected to hear, and it was this: he already knew he was going to refuse. The fire was lit 11 days later, on a gray morning with sleet coming sideways off the water meadow, and I was there because I had been summoned to carry the dog. That was how it was done, you see. Morwenna did not come to drag the animal out herself. She sent for the kennel-master for me, with instructions to bring a lead and a muzzle to the late Queen's morning room, where I would be told what was wanted. I knew what was wanted before I climbed the stairs. I brought the lead. I did not bring the muzzle. It was the one act of defiance I had in me that morning, and it was a small and secret one, a muzzle left hanging on its peg, and I have never been prouder of a smaller thing. When I came into the corridor, Corporal Thane was at his post beside the morning room door, exactly as he was every morning, his rifle at his shoulder and his eyes forward and the sleet ticking against the tall windows behind him. He did not look at me. But as I passed him, he said, very low, without moving his lips more than he had to, "Is it today, then?" It was not a question. I said, "I think it's today." "Then stand where you can see the door," he said, "and do not put the lead on him until you are told to, and when you are told to, look at me before you do it." I did not understand that either. I understood it within the hour. Inside, the morning room was as the late Queen had left it, which is to say it was the most alive dead room I have ever stood in. Her writing desk under the window with the pen laid across the blotter, her chair with the shawl still over the back of it, faded now to the color of weak tea, her books, the little clock that a footman still wound every week because no one had told him to stop, and the square of gray daylight on the floorboards where, on a better morning, there would have been sun, and where Bracken lay with his long legs folded under him and his chin on his paws, watching the door. Queen Consort Morwenna stood by the cold fireplace with her back very straight. She was a handsome woman, dark-haired, richly dressed even at that hour, and she had arranged herself so that the light from the window fell on her and not on the shabby, beloved clutter of the dead woman's room. Beside her, seated, was her son Lord Cassius, a young man of perhaps 20 with his mother's coloring and none of her nerve, turning a signet ring round and round on his finger and looking as though he wished he were anywhere else. And by the door, having come in behind me, was a fourth person I had not expected, a lean, gray man in a dark coat with a leather case, whom I did not know and did not like the look of, and whose profession I guessed at once from the way he would not meet the dog's eyes. He was a physician of animals. Morwenna had brought a man to put the dog down. I want to be careful here because you will want me to tell you that she was a monster, and it would be easier for all of us if she were. But she was not raving. She did not gloat. She spoke, when she spoke, in the reasonable, regretful voice of a woman doing a distasteful duty that softer people had shirked. That was the terrible part. She had convinced herself that this was mercy. "Osric," she said when I came in, "thank you. This will not take long, and then the poor creature will be at peace." I did not answer. I had learned long ago that when a great person tells you a thing is for the best, the safest reply is silence, and the bravest reply is also silence, only louder. "He is old," she went on as if I had argued. "He is in pain. Master Vel here has only to look at him to see it. He does not eat as he should. He grieves, which is a torment for an animal who cannot understand what it grieves for. We keep him alive out of our own sentiment, and it is not kind. The kind thing is to let him go gently here, in the quiet, in the room he knows." She glanced once at the shawl over the chair, and something crossed her face that I could not read and was gone. "Master Vel will see to it. Put the lead on him and hold him still. He trusts you. It will be easier for him if it is your hand. Now I want you to understand the trap of it. She had made me the instrument. If I put the lead on Bracken and held him still, then I, the man who had sat 2 nights on a cold floor beside him, I would be the hand that betrayed him, and she would have committed the deed at one remove, through the person the dog loved best, so that she need never feel the animal's frightened eyes on her own face. And if I refused, I was a servant defying a queen in front of witnesses, and I would be dismissed by nightfall, and some other, less loving hand would be found, and the end would be the same for the dog, only lonelier. I looked at the lead in my hands. I looked at Bracken, who had lifted his head and was watching me with the mild, trusting patience of a creature who has never in his life been given a reason not to trust the men around him. And I remembered what the guard had said. "When you are told to, look at me before you do it." So I looked at Corporal Thane. He had come to the doorway. I do not know when. A guardsman is not supposed to enter a room he is posting. His duty is the threshold. but the door had been left open. I think Morwenna wanted a witness to the household's compliance, wanted it seen and known that even the late Queen's own guard stood by while the sentiment was ended. And Thane had taken one step across the threshold and no more, so that he stood framed in the doorway with the gray sleet light behind him. His rifle grounded now, its butt on the floorboards and his white-gloved hand resting on the barrel, and his pale eyes level on the room. "Master Vel," he said, his voice was not loud. In that hushed room it did not need to be. "You will not open that case." The animal physician stopped with his hand on the clasp. Morwenna turned. I saw the surprise reach her face and then be mastered, folded away, replaced with the cool patience of a woman who is not accustomed to being interrupted by the furniture. "Corporal," she said, "this is a private matter of the household. Return to your post." "This is my post, madam," Thane said. "These are the late Queen's apartments. I have stood this door for 5 years. What crosses it is my concern." "The dog," Morwenna said, "is not a matter of state." "No, madam. It is a matter of orders, and I have not received the order you are relying on." There was a silence then, of a particular quality. Lord Cassius had stopped turning his ring. The animal physician had taken his hand off his case and put both hands behind his back like a schoolboy. And I stood there with a lead in my hands and my heart going like a hare's, because I had seen, in an instant, the shape of what Thane was doing, and it was so simple and so dangerous that it took my breath. He was not appealing to her mercy. He was not arguing that the dog should live. He had found the one door in the law that a queen could not simply walk through, and he had planted himself in it. "I do not require an order," Morwenna said, and her voice had cooled another degree. "I am the Queen Consort of this realm. My word within this household is order enough." "For the living household, madam, I do not doubt it," Thane said. "But these rooms and everything in them are not the living household. They are held apart. The late Queen's estate was settled by decree at her death, and placed under the King's own protection until such time as His Majesty directs otherwise. Her rooms, her effects, her books, her seal," he paused, and his eyes moved just once to the gray dog in the square of light, "and her dog. I stand this door under that decree. I take my orders in this doorway from the King, or from the steward of the late Queen's estate acting in the King's name, or from a written instrument bearing the King's seal. I do not take them from a spoken word, madam, not even yours." I have thought many times since about the courage it took to say those 2 last sentences. Not the defiance is easy. Any fool can be defiant. I have seen drunkards defy kings. The courage was in the precision. He did not raise his voice, did not insult her, did not make it a quarrel between a man and a woman where she could have him broken for insolence. He made it a quarrel between a queen's whim and a king's decree, and he stood on the decree, which is a stone even a queen cannot lift with her bare hands. "You are refusing me," Morwenna said. She said it slowly, testing the words, as though she could not quite believe they described the situation. "I am refusing to let that case be opened in this room, on a spoken word, over an animal that is part of an estate under the King's protection," Thane said. "Yes, madam. If His Majesty gives me the order under his seal, I will stand aside. Until then the dog stays, and the door stays, and this gentleman keeps his case shut." Morwenna looked at him for a long moment. I watched her weigh him the way you might weigh a locked gate, testing where it was hinged, where it was barred, whether it might be gone around. And I saw her decide in that moment that she would not force it now. She was too clever for that. To have her own son and 2 servants haul the late Queen's dog past the late Queen's guard, with the guard forbidding it, would make a scene that would travel through the palace by nightfall and reach the King's ear before it had cooled, and it would put her, not the dog, in the wrong. She would not give him that. She would go around. "Master Vel," she said pleasantly, "I am sorry to have wasted your morning. It seems the household has grown so tender of an old dog's comfort that it will not permit even a kindness. We will speak again when the matter has been regularized." She said the word with a small, cold precision that frightened me more than shouting would have. "Cassius, come." She swept out. Her son rose and followed her, not meeting my eyes, and the animal physician gathered his shut case and went after them with the air of a man glad to be quit of it. And then the morning room was quiet, and it held only an old kennel-master with a lead in his hands, a great gray dog in a square of dull light, and a guardsman standing in a doorway with his rifle grounded and his face as still as a stone in a wall. I let out the breath I had been holding. "Corporal," I said, "you've made an enemy of her." "I made an enemy of her the day I asked to keep this post," he said. "She only found it out this morning." He stepped back over the threshold, back to his proper place in the corridor, and grounded his rifle again and became once more a figure of red and black and white with his eyes forward. But before he did, he looked down at Bracken, and for the length of one breath the stone face was not stone. "Take him to your kennels for a few days," he said. "Not the far kennels, yours near you. She'll be looking for him alone. Don't let him be alone." I did as he said. I clipped the lead on gently. Bracken rose and stretched and pressed his great head against my hip, trusting, always trusting, and I led him out past the guard, and Bracken stopped, as he always did, and touched his nose to the back of Thane's white glove in the way he greeted men he had decided belonged to him. Thane did not move. Guardsmen do not. But I saw his gloved fingers turn, very slightly, so that for half a second the old dog's muzzle rested in his open hand. Then we went down to the kennels, the dog and I, and behind us the guard stood his empty doorway, and I remember thinking, with the particular gloom of an old man who has watched the powerful get their way his whole life, he has bought the dog a week, no more than a week. She will regularize it, whatever that means, and then there will be a paper, and a paper is a thing even he must obey. I was right about the paper. I was wrong about the week. It was 9 days. In those 9 days, I learned the rest of what I am telling you, because in those 9 days the 3 children found out that their mother's dog had nearly been taken from them, and grief that has a name behaves differently from grief that does not. It was Torin who found out first. 11-year-olds hear everything, the way kennel masters do, and he came down to my kennels white and shaking with a fury too big for his body. He wanted to go to his father, the king, directly, that hour, and demand it stopped. I had to hold him by both shoulders and talk him down because the king was not at the palace. That was the thing I had not told you yet, and it is the thing that made the whole affair possible. King Alaric had been away since the turn of the month, at the far edge of the realm where a hard winter had put whole villages under snow, doing the work a king does when his people are suffering, riding cold roads, opening granaries, being seen. He was not expected back for another fortnight, and Morwenna knew it. Everything she did in the window of the king's absence, so that by the time he returned the dog would be a settled matter, a small sad thing already done, the kind of thing a returning king does not reopen. "Then we write to him," Torin said fiercely. "We send a rider." "And what will you write, lad?" I asked him, as gently as I could. "That the Queen Consort thinks your mother's old dog is suffering and ought to be put down mercifully. Written plain like that, on a paper carried 3 days through the snow to a king with frozen villages on his mind. Do you think it will sound like a crime? Or will it sound like a fussing over a hound while men are dying in drifts?" He had no answer. He was 11, and he had just run headlong into the oldest wall in the world, which is that the powerful choose the ground, and the ground they choose is always the ground where their small cruelty looks reasonable, and your great grief looks like fuss. But little Bram, who was 6, did a thing that Torin in all his fury had not thought to do. Bram went to the kennels every day, sat in the straw with his arms around the dog's neck, and told Bracken in the fierce whispering confidence of a small boy that no one was going to take him, that he, Bram, would not allow it. And on the 3rd day, sitting there, he pulled at the green collar the way children do, working the old leather in his fingers, and he said to me, "Osric, what's this bit?" "What bit, your highness?" "This bit, it's got a pocket." I came and looked, and I will tell you honestly that I had handled that collar 1,000 times and never known it. On the inside of the broad green band, where it lay against the dog's throat, hidden by a fold and stitched so cleverly it looked like a seam, there was a small flat pocket of leather. And inside the pocket, folded to the size of a postage stamp, dry and stiff, was a piece of paper. My hands were not steady as I worked it out. I unfolded it on the kennel bench with Bram breathing over my elbow and the dog watching us both with his patient eyes. It was the late Queen's hand. I knew it at once, the tall, narrow letters, the way she crossed her sevens, and it was faded but it was clear. And this is what it said, and I have it by heart, for I read it more times in the following days than I have read anything in my life. To whoever finds this, and I think it will be Osric, because it is always Osric who finds the things I hide, Bracken is not a dog to me. He is the last of my witnesses. When I am gone, they will want to be rid of everything that remembers me, because the dead are inconvenient to the living, and he remembers me more truly than any portrait. Do not let him be sent away to die alone among strangers to spare someone the sight of my grief walking about on 4 legs. He is to stay where the children are, all his life, and be buried in the heron garden when his time comes of its own accord, and not 1 hour before. This is my wish, set down in my own hand, and if it is ever contested, take it to the king and tell him I asked it. He will remember why. Isolde R. I sat on that bench a long time after I had read it, an old man and a small boy and an old dog in the smell of clean straw and leather, and I thought, she knew. She knew before she died exactly how it would go, and who would do it and why, and she had folded her defense into the collar of the one creature they would try to destroy, so that the dog carried, around his own throat, the pardon for his own life. I do not know a braver or a sadder thing than that. A dying woman, foreseeing the small meanness of the world she was leaving and arming her dog against it. I took the paper straight to Corporal Thane. He read it once, standing at his post, holding it in his white-gloved hand as carefully as if it were made of ash. When he had finished, he folded it again along its old creases and gave it back to me, and he was quiet for a moment. "This is her hand?" he asked. "You are certain?" "I'd know it in the dark." "And look, see there at the bottom the small heron before the R. She drew that on everything private, everything she meant only for the people she trusted. It was her mark. She never used it on a state paper in her life." "Then it is exactly what we need and exactly what will not be enough," Thane said, and when he saw my face fall he explained it patiently the way he explained everything, as a man laying out ground before a march. "A wish is not a decree, Osric. A paper hidden in a collar, unwitnessed, unsealed. The Queen Consort's people will say it is a forgery or a fancy, or that it was superseded by the estate settlement. On its own, in front of the household, it is a scrap of leather and a dead woman's sentiment against a living queen's word. They will not weigh it in our favor. They dare not. It gives the king a reason. It does not give me an order." He looked at me. "But it changes one thing, and it changes it entirely. Before this I was refusing her a whim to protect an animal. That is a servant's stubbornness, and a servant's stubbornness can be broken. Now I am holding a door until the king can honor his dead wife's own written wish. That is not stubbornness. That is duty, and duty I can hold until I fall down." "You truly mean to hold it," I said, "against her for a dog?" "For the late queen," he said. "The dog is how she chose to say it." And then, because I think he saw that I needed more than that, he gave me the one piece of himself he ever gave me, quietly, with his eyes forward and the sleet still ticking on the glass. "When I first came to this post," he said, "I was not a good soldier. I had done a thing on a previous posting that I am not going to tell you about, and I had been sent here as a kind of burial, a man they did not want to break but did not trust to use. I stood this corridor for a year believing I was finished, that my service was a formality kept up to spare everyone the trouble of dismissing me. And then one afternoon the late queen came out of that room alone, and she stopped in front of me, which she had never done, and she looked at me for a while and she said, 'They tell me you are a disgraced corporal.' And I said, "Yes, your majesty." And she said, "Good, disgraced men know the price of honor, the comfortable ones only know the word." And she went on down the corridor, and that was all. She never mentioned it again. He was silent a moment. She gave me back my honor with 2 sentences, Osric, in a corridor, for no reason but that she could see I needed it and it cost her nothing. So when you ask me whether I will hold a door for her dog, yes, I will hold it until they carry me off this post. She is owed that, and a great deal more, and I have very little else to pay her with. I did not trust myself to speak. I took the little paper, and I put it back where the late queen had hidden it, folded small in the pocket inside the collar against the dog's warm throat, because it seemed to me that was where she had wanted it and I had no better idea. And I took Bracken back to the kennels, and I waited for the paper Morwenna had promised, the one that would make it legal, and on the 9th day it came. It did not come as I had imagined it, a queen's decree with ribbons and seals. It came as something cleverer and colder. It came as an order signed by the steward of the household, one Lord Reeve, a dry, precise man who managed the palace's affairs and who owed his place to Morwenna's favor. And it was addressed not to me and not to the guard, but to the whole of the domestic staff. And it was a masterpiece of the kind of cruelty that hides inside good order. It did not mention the dog at all. It announced that, in preparation for His Majesty's return and the coming spring, the late Queen's apartments were to be cleared, catalogued, and closed. The effects were to be removed to the estate stores. The rooms were to be aired, cleaned, and made ready for other use. And this was the blade, wrapped in 6 lines of housekeeping. All animals kept within the said apartments or attached to the said estate are to be removed to the working kennels beyond the water meadow, there to be maintained or dispersed at the discretion of the master of hounds, in accordance with the settlement of the estate. Signed, sealed with the steward's seal, dated, and this was the point of it, perfectly legal. Morwenna had not needed to order the dog killed. She had only needed to order the rooms closed, as any household closes the rooms of the dead, and let the dog be swept out with the furniture to the far kennels, to be maintained or dispersed. And once he was there, 3 days' walk from the children and out of the guard's doorway, dispersing him would be the quiet work of an afternoon that no one would ever hear about. She had gone around the door, just as she said she would. I brought the order to Corporal Thane at a run, or as near a run as an old man manages, and he read it. And for the first time since this whole business began, I saw something in his face that frightened me, because it was not anger. It was calculation, and under the calculation, a shadow of doubt. "This is signed under the estate settlement," he said, half to himself. "It is the steward acting in the king's name, which is exactly the authority I told her I would obey." She listened. She listened to every word I said in that room, and she built me a paper I cannot refuse. He read it again. "It does not order the dog harmed. That is the trap. If I stand my door against this, I am refusing a lawful order to clear rooms and store effects. I am not defending the late Queen's wish any more. I am obstructing the settlement of an estate, and any officer of the guard who did that would be relieved by nightfall, and I would be relieved rightly. She has made my honor into disobedience." He lowered the paper. "She is very good, Osric." I did not think she was this good. "Then it's over," I said. My voice did not hold. "They'll take him to the far kennels and there's nothing." "I did not say it was over," Thane said sharply, and the sharpness steadied me the way a slap steadies a fainting man. "I said she is good. I have been beaten by better than her, and I am still standing posts. Listen to me. She has won the paper. She has not won the clock. This order says the rooms are to be cleared before His Majesty's return. She has read the same reports I have. The king is a fortnight off, buried in snow. She thinks she has a fortnight to move the dog 3 days' walk away, and let him quietly disappear before the king is ever near enough to ask after him. That is her whole plan. It lives or dies on the king being far away and slow. He is far away and slow. Then we make him near, and we make him fast," Thane said, And we do it without sending a letter that a queen's man can intercept in the snow, and without giving her 1 hour of warning that we are doing it. Osric, how does a dog find its way home over a country it has never walked? I did not understand him. By its nose, by the ground. A hound put down anywhere within a day of home will, I stopped. Something moved in me, a cold thrill. You are not thinking of the dog. I am thinking of the dog exactly, Thane said. Where is the king, precisely? Not the reports. You have kennel boys who carry messages and grooms who ride the far roads. Where is he this week? I told him what I knew, which was more than the official reports, because grooms and kennel boys always know more than stewards. The king was not, that week, in the deep snow country at all. He had come down out of the high villages 3 days early, the hard work there done, and was resting the column at a hunting lodge on the near side of the winter forest, a place called Aldermere, that I knew well, for the late queen had loved it and I had brought her hounds there a dozen times in better years. Aldermere was not a fortnight away. Aldermere, hard-ridden, was 2 days, and the road to Aldermere ran along the near edge of the water meadow, which is to say it ran within sight of the very far kennels where Morwenna intended to send the dog to disappear. Thane was quiet for a moment, and I watched him build the thing in his head, brick by brick, the way he built everything. Here is what she has not thought of, he said at last, because she thinks of the dog as a problem to be filed away, and I think of the dog as the late queen's last witness, and that is the difference that will beat her. She has ordered him sent to the far kennels. Very well. Let him go to the far kennels legally, in order, with no scene, no defiance, nothing for her to point at. And the moment he is there, out of her sight and off my door and no longer her concern, he stops being a state matter and becomes what he has always been, an old hunting hound, at a hunting kennel, 2 days' ride from a king who is resting his column at the very lodge where that hound learned to run. Kings hunt when they rest, Osric. It is the one thing they cannot help doing, and a king at Aldermere will send to the near kennels for hounds. And when he does, the master of hounds sends what he's asked for, I breathed, and I am the one who chooses what goes. You are the one who chooses what goes, Thane agreed. And you will make very sure that when the king of Eldermore calls for a hound at Aldermere, the hound that is brought to him out of all the kennel is a gray deerhound 12 years old with a heron on his collar and his dead mistress's own hand folded inside it. And then it will not be a servant's stubbornness or a hidden paper against a queen's word. It will be the king, alone, in the forest his wife loved, with his wife's dog put suddenly into his hands. Let her regularize that. I have served that house 51 years, and I have never heard a finer piece of strategy, and it was made by a corporal of the guard in a cold corridor, over a dog, in under a minute, and its whole engine was this. He did not fight the paper. He obeyed the paper exactly and cheerfully all the way to the far kennels, because he had seen that the paper, obeyed exactly, carried the dog straight toward the one man who could undo it. She had built a road to sweep the dog away. He simply saw that the road, followed to its end, ran right past the king. But I have not told you the false dawn, and there was one, because these things never run smooth, and the plan very nearly died on the 2nd day. It began well. The order was carried out to the letter, and Thane made sure of it, and made sure he was seen making sure of it. He stood aside from his door. He let the estate men come and go. He offered no obstruction to the clearing of the rooms, so that no word could reach Morwenna that the late Queen's guard was resisting anything at all. Bracken was walked by me, on the late Queen's own lead, down across the sleet-gray water meadow to the far kennels, in perfect and lawful order, and lodged there among the working hounds. And I told the far kennel man, an honest fellow named Padrick who had no love for the new Queen's people, that when the call came from Aldermere, and it would come, for it always came, the gray deerhound was to go up in the draft whatever else did, and that if anyone asked, it was the master of hounds' own order, which it was, for I was the master of hounds and I had just given it. And then, on the 2nd night, Lord Cassius came down to the far kennels with 3 men and a covered cart. I was not there. I had gone up to the palace to be near the children who needed me, and to keep my own comings and goings ordinary so that no one would wonder why the master of hounds was suddenly haunting the far kennels. It was Padraic who woke me before dawn, having ridden up through the dark on a kennel pony with his coat thrown on inside out, and the story he told me put the ground out from under my feet. Cassius had come with a written order, another one freshly made, this time from the Queen Consort's own household and not the steward's, authorizing the removal of surplus and infirm animals from the working kennels for disposal, at the master of the far kennel's discretion. It named no dog. It did not have to. Cassius had walked the ranges by lantern light with the 3 men, and he had pointed at the gray deerhound, and he had said that this one, the old gray one, was plainly infirm and suffering, and was to be taken up in the cart tonight, and driven out to be dealt with kindly in the morning, well away from the palace where his whimpering would not distress the children. He had reckoned without Padraic. I told him, Padraic said, twisting his cap the way I twist mine. I told him the gray hound was under the master of hounds' own standing order, and could not be drafted out without your word, sir. And the young lord went white and then red, and said his mother's household outranked a kennel-master. And I said maybe it did and maybe it didn't, but I'd not hand over a hound against my master's written order to a man with a cart in the dark. And if his lordship wanted the dog, he could come back by daylight with the steward and the master of hounds both, and take it up proper in the book with names signed. Padraic swallowed. He didn't like it, sir. He and his men stood in the yard a good while. I'll be honest with you, I thought they might just take the dog and be damned to me, 3 of them and 1 of me and the night dark. But I stood in the kennel door with the lantern and I didn't move, and, well, in the end I suppose the young lord hadn't the stomach to force a locked kennel with his own hands, not with witnesses that could name him. So he went. But he'll be back by daylight, sir, with the paper made right and the steward beside him, and then I've no ground left to stand on. I only bought you the 1 night. 1 night. It kept coming back to that all through this affair. A day here, 9 days, 1 night. Small mercies of time bought at great cost by men who had no power except the power to stand still in a doorway and not move. I have come to think that is the whole of what honor is in the end. Not grand gestures. Just the refusal to move out of the way for 1 more hour than you have to, and the willingness to pay for that hour whatever it costs. I did the sum in my head, and it was a cruel one. The king was at Aldermere, 2 days' hard ride off. The call for hounds might come today, or tomorrow, or not for a week. A king rests when he rests, and hunts when he hunts, and no kennel-master can command it. And Cassius would be back at the far kennels by noon with a paper I could not refuse, and this time Padraic's lantern would not hold him. My whole plan had depended on the dog sitting quietly at the far kennels until the king's call came to draw him up the road to Aldermere. But the dog would not be at the far kennels by noon. The dog would be in a covered cart, being driven the other way. Unless the call came first, or unless I made it come. I will tell you plainly what I did, because I have never been ashamed of it, though a stricter man than I might say I overstepped. I did not have the king's call for hounds, so I forged the want of it. I saddled the best pony in my charge before the sky was gray, and I sent my quickest kennel boy, a wiry lad named Finn who could ride anything with legs, not to the king with a letter which could be stopped, but to Aldermere itself, to the huntsman of the lodge, a man I had known 30 years, with a spoken message and no paper at all. The message was this, that the master of hounds sent his respects, and that he had heard his majesty was resting the column at Aldermere, and that if his majesty had any thought of a morning's hunt while the ground held, there was a gray deerhound at the near kennels, old but true, that had run that very forest with the late queen and knew every deer path in it, and would his majesty perhaps care to have that particular hound sent up before any other. Spoken, huntsman to huntsman, remembered and passed along inside the lodge where no queen's man could intercept it. A suggestion planted in the one ear that could turn it into a royal command. And then I did the only other thing I could think of, which was to go back to Corporal Thane, because it seemed to me that when a plan is failing, the thing to do is stand next to the steadiest man you know. He heard me out, Padraig, Cassius, the cart, Fen riding for Aldermere, standing at his post in the grey dawn light with the emptied morning room behind him, its furniture gone now to the stores, its square of floor bare where the sun would have fallen. And when I had finished, he did a thing I had never once seen him do in 5 years. He left his post. He did not do it lightly. He called down the corridor to the guardsman at the stairhead, a younger man named Corey, and he said, "Corey, I am standing off my door on a matter of the late Queen's estate. Log it as my order and my responsibility, the hour and the reason, and if I am asked, I answer for it, not you." And then he grounded nothing, shouldered his rifle, and came with me, because he had understood before I had said it that the fight had left the palace and gone down to a kennel yard by the water meadow, and a door in an empty corridor was no longer the door that mattered. We went down together through the cold morning, the old kennel-master and the guardsman off his post, and I will not pretend we had a plan worthy of the name. We had a forged want of a call 2 days' ride away, and a boy on a pony, and a dog in a kennel that a lord with a paper would come to empty by noon, and between the dog and that lord we had one thing only, which was a corporal of the guard who had decided he would not move. "If Cassius comes before Fen brings anything back," I said as we walked, "you cannot refuse him, you told me yourself. The paper will be right this time. You'll be obstructing the settlement of the estate. They'll relieve you." "They will," Thane agreed. "Then what will you do?" He walked a few paces before he answered, his breath smoking in the cold, his eyes on the grey line of the water meadow ahead. "I will stand in the kennel door," he said, "and I will tell Lord Cassius that he may take the dog when he has shown me an order under the king's seal that names this dog and commands this dog harmed. Not a general order about surplus animals, not the estate settlement. An order from the king, for this hound's death in words under the seal. He will not have it because there is no such order, and there never will be, because the king has never once been asked. And when he cannot produce it, I will not let him pass, paper or no paper, and yes, they will relieve me and try me and likely break me for obstructing a lawful settlement over an animal." He glanced at me. "But it will take them time to do it, Osric. A guardsman cannot simply be knocked down and stepped over, not by a lord with 3 grooms, not without a scene that reaches the whole palace and then the king. They will have to fetch officers, send for the steward, convene the thing properly, and all of that is ours, and ours is what we are buying. It has always been what we are buying. I will hold the kennel door the way I held the corridor door for exactly as long as it takes, and I will trust that somewhere 2 days up the road a boy on a pony is turning a want into a call. That is not a plan, but it is a post, and I know how to stand a post. I have thought since that this was the truest thing he ever said to me, and the whole of his character in 3 sentences. He did not know if he would win. He had, in cold fact, been outmaneuvered by a cleverer opponent with the law on her side. And his answer to that was not despair and not some brilliant reversal, but simply this: to find the last doorway left and stand in it, and make them pay in hours for every step, and trust the hours to somebody riding somewhere he could not see. A post is a promise you keep when you cannot see the end of it. He had learned that from a woman in a corridor who told him disgraced men know the price of honor, and he had never forgotten the lesson. And now he was going to spend everything he had to pay her back for it, in the coin of an old gray dog. We came down to the far kennels a little after sunrise. Bracken heard me at the gate and set up the low, glad rumble deep in his chest that deerhounds make, not a bark, more like distant thunder, and pushed his long nose through the bars to find my hand. Padraig was there, gray-faced from a night without sleep. And even as we came into the yard, we heard, on the frozen road from the palace, the sound of horses, more than one, coming at a steady, lordly walk, in no hurry at all, the way men ride when they are certain the thing they are coming to do is already done. Lord Cassius had come back by daylight with the paper made right, and the steward Lord Reeve riding sour and reluctant at his side, and 4 men behind, and the covered cart. And Fenn and his pony were somewhere out on a 2-day road with the sun barely up, and would not be back for the better part of 2 days more. And there was nothing between an old dog and that cart except an old man, an honest kennel man, and a corporal of the guard standing in a kennel doorway with his rifle grounded and his face set like the stone over a grave. Lord Cassius swung down from his horse in the frozen yard with the paper already in his hand, and I will say for him that he did not enjoy this the way a truly cruel man would have. He was pale and his jaw was tight, and he did the thing quickly, the way a man rushes at a cold pond. "Master of hounds," he said, not looking at me but at Padraic, "I have here the steward's order and my mother's authority both, for the removal of the infirm gray deerhound. There is no obstruction to be made. Bring him out." Nobody moved. Padraic looked at me. I looked at Thane, and Cassius, following our eyes, finally saw the guardsman standing in the kennel doorway, and his face changed. "You," he said, "you have no business here. This is a kennel, not the palace corridors. Stand aside." "I stand where the late Queen's estate stands, my lord," Thane said. "This morning that is here." He did not raise his voice. In the still cold air it carried across the whole yard, and Padraic's underboys had gathered at the edges, and the steward Lord Reeve sat his horse a little apart with the look of a careful man who has begun to suspect he is on the wrong side of something. "You have brought a paper. Show it to me." "I do not answer to a corporal." "Show it to me," Thane said, "or take it back to the palace unsatisfied, my lord, because that dog does not leave this kennel while I stand in the door, and I will stand in the door until you show me lawful cause to move me." Cassius, coloring, thrust the paper at him. Thane took it in his white glove and read it, unhurried, twice, while the horses stamped and blew in the cold and no one spoke. Then he folded it and held it out again. "This orders the removal of surplus and infirm animals," he said. "It does not name this dog. It does not order this dog harmed. It is a housekeeping order, my lord, and I do not obstruct housekeeping. If you wish to remove a surplus animal from these kennels, remove one. But this hound is not surplus and he is not infirm. He is the late Queen Isolde's own dog, kept by her written wish, and he is part of an estate under the king's protection, and to take him from here to be dealt with kindly in the morning, which is the phrase your man used to the kennel-master last night, in the dark, with a covered cart, is not housekeeping. It is the destruction of a protected thing, and for that you will show me an order from the king under the king's seal that names this dog. You do not have it. You cannot have it because the king has never been asked, because the whole of this has been built to be finished before the king could be asked. I know it, my lord. And now Lord Reeve knows it too, for I see it in his face. So here is where we are. The dog stays until the king is asked. Ask him." I have never seen a young man so trapped by so few words. Cassius could not answer the charge, because it was true, and he knew that everyone in that yard now knew it was true. And I saw him do the thing that trapped men of his kind always do, which is to try to make it a matter of force instead of a matter of right, because force was the only ground left where he might still win. "Take the dog," he said to his 4 men, his voice cracking. "He is one guardsman. Take the dog." And here is the moment, and I will tell it exactly, because it has been told wrong by people who were not there. They did not take the dog, and there was no brawl and no blood, and the dog was never for one instant in danger of harm, and the reason is that Corporal Roland Thane did not fight the 4 men. He did something far harder and far more frightening than fighting. He unslung his rifle from his shoulder. The men flinched, expecting a weapon leveled, and instead he grounded it deliberately but to the frozen cobbles and took his hand off it, and stood in the kennel doorway with both empty white-gloved hands open at his sides, and he said, in that same flat carrying voice, "You are welcome to try, and I will not raise a hand to you. Lay hands on the king's guard while he stands his post, in front of the steward of the household in a yard full of witnesses, over the late queen's dog, and go home and explain that to the king when he returns. I will not stop you. I will only stand here and remember your names and be here to answer for it when he asks who moved me. Come then." And he did not move, and his empty hands did not close, and his eyes went from one man to the next, naming them without a word. Not one of them touched him. 4 grown men, armed with the strength of their arms and a lord's command, and they stood in the cold and could not make themselves lay hands on an unresisting guardsman who had just told them, plainly, exactly what it would cost. Because he had taken the one thing away from them that they needed, he had taken away the fight. A man who fights back can be overpowered, and it is a scuffle, a servant's brawl, deniable. A man who stands with open hands and lets you strike him has turned your violence into the only thing it truly is, which is the assault of the powerful on the disciplined, in front of witnesses, and no man among those 4 wanted to be the name Thane remembered. The yard held its breath, and into that frozen, breathless yard at a gallop on a lathered pony came Prince Torin. He was 11 and he had ridden 4 miles cross-country in the cold without a coat, and he came off the pony before it had fully stopped and put himself between the men and the kennel door, next to the guard, small and furious and shaking, and he shouted in a voice that broke in the middle of it, "That is my mother's dog, and you will not and could not finish, and did not need to." Because behind Torin, following at a hard canter where he had come at a gallop, on a tall gray palace horse with 2 of her own household behind her, came a woman none of them had expected, and none of them could refuse, and the sight of her took the last of the ground out from under Lord Cassius as neatly as a trap sprung. It was Princess Adela, the king's own sister, aunt to the children, of the true blood royal, and no more to be commanded by the Queen Consort's household than the king himself. Torin had gone to her. That was the peace I had not known, and it was the best thing the boy ever did. When his own fury could find no door in the palace to open the king away, the steward bought, the household silent, he had thought, with the clear, cruel logic of a child who has run out of grown-ups he can trust, of the one grown-up left who was above the Queen Consort's reach. He had gone to his aunt. And Princess Adela, who had loved the late Queen Isolde as a true sister, loves the woman her brother married well, had risen from her breakfast, called for her horse and ridden. She did not dismount. She sat her tall gray horse in the middle of the frozen yard and looked slowly around it, the covered cart, the 4 hesitating men, the trapped young lord, the sour steward, the old kennel-master, the boy shaking with cold and rage, and the guardsman standing in the kennel door with his rifle grounded and his empty hands open. And she read the whole of it in a moment, the way people of that blood are trained from the cradle to read a room. And when she spoke, her voice was quiet, and it fell on that yard like a portcullis coming down. "Cassius," she said, "you will tell me what you are doing to my late sister's dog." Whatever Cassius had meant to say died in his mouth. He managed something about the steward's order, the infirm animals, the settlement of the estate, his mother's authority, and Princess Adela let him talk himself empty, which took no long time, and then she said, "The estate of my late sister-in-law is under the protection of my brother the king, not under the authority of the Queen Consort, and not under yours, and not under Lord Reeves, whatever he has put his seal to." Her eyes went to the steward, who had the grace to look at his horse's neck. "Any disposal of any part of that estate, a chair, a book, or a dog waits for the king. That is the law, and it has been the law since the hour she died, and this corporal is the only person in this yard who has troubled to remember it." She looked at Thane then, for the first time directly, and something passed over her face that I can only call recognition. "Corporal, you have held this alone." "No, your highness," Thane said. "The kennel-master held it, and this man Padrek held it, and the boy has just held it. I only stood the door." "He only stood the door," Adela repeated, and there was the ghost of something in her voice, and she turned it back on the yard hard. "He only stood the door. against the whole clever weight of a household, for a dead woman who cannot thank him and a dog that cannot speak, when every soul above him had found a reason to look away. Cassius, take your cart and your men, and go back to the palace, and tell your mother that the late queen's dog is under my hand now, and my brother's, and will not be touched. Go." They went. There is not much dignity in the going of men who have lost a thing they were certain of, and I will not dwell on it. The cart turned in the yard and rattled empty back up the frozen road, and Lord Reeve rode after it looking like a man rearranging in his head the story he would tell to save his place, and Lord Cassius went last of all, and did not look back, and I almost felt for him, a young man sent to do his mother's cold work and made to carry the shame of it home alone. And then it was only us, and the dog in the quiet after. Bracken, who had stood the whole while with his nose at the bars and his ears up, not understanding the words but understanding, the way dogs do, that the people he trusted were in some trouble, now set up his deep glad thunder again, and Princess Adela got down at last from her tall horse and went to the kennel, and let the old grey hound press his head into her hands, and I saw the king's sister stand in a cold kennel yard with her forehead bent to a dog's rough brow, and her shoulders moved once, and none of us looked at her while she remembered her sister. The king came home 11 days later, and the rest you may imagine, but I will tell it, because the manner of it mattered. Fenn's message had reached Aldermere, and done its work better than we dared hope. The king had indeed called for a morning's hunt, and had indeed been told there was a grey deerhound at the near kennels that had run that forest with the late queen, and being told it, and being a man who had loved his first wife more than he ever let the court see, he had grown very quiet and asked more questions, and the huntsman, who was an honest man and had heard things, had answered them. So the king did not wait to come home in his own slow time. He came fast, and he came knowing, and Princess Adela's own rider met him half a day out with the whole of it laid plain, the remarks, the physician with his case, the guard in the doorway, the paper about the rooms, the second paper about surplus animals, the covered cart in the dark, the standoff in the kennel yard. I was in the great hall when he dealt with it, because he sent for me, and for Padraic, and for Fenn, and above all for Corporal Thane, and he had us stand along one wall while the household assembled, and he did not do it in private, which he could have done, and which would have been kinder to his wife. He did it in the open before the court, because he had decided that the wrong had been done in the shadows, and the setting right would be done in the light, and I have loved him for that choice every day since. He had the collar brought. I brought it myself, and I drew out from the little hidden pocket the folded paper in the late queen's hand, and it was read aloud in that hall in the reader's flat, clear voice, to whoever finds this, and I think it will be Osric. He is the last of my witnesses. Do not let him be sent away to die alone among strangers. Take it to the king, and tell him I asked it. He will remember why, and I watched the king's face while it was read, and I watched him remember why, whatever it was, some private thing between a husband and the wife he had lost, and I saw a strong man in his own hall take hold of the arms of his chair, and hold himself still by main force, while a dead woman's voice came up out of a dog's collar, and asked him for one small mercy she had known, dying. She would have to reach out of the grave to secure. When it was done, he was quiet a long moment. Then he spoke, and he did not shout, and he did not need to. He confirmed first, in words that were written down that day and sealed, that the late Queen Isolde's wish was granted in full. The dog Bracken to remain where the children were, all his life, cared for at the royal charge, and buried in the heron garden when his time came of its own accord and not 1 hour before. The exact words of her paper made law. He ordered the late queen's apartments reopened and her effects restored to them, and closed only when he himself, and no other, gave the word. He removed Lord Reeve from the stewardship for sealing an order he knew to be aimed at a protected estate, though he did it without disgrace, for Reeve had been a weak man and not a wicked one, and the king was not a cruel judge. To Lord Cassius he said only in front of them all, "You are young, and you were sent. I will remember that you did not, in the end, lay hands on my guard or my dog. See that you never again let anyone send you to do in the dark what you would be ashamed to do in this hall." Which was mercy, and was also a brand the young man would carry the rest of his life, and both of those were deserved. And to the Queen Consort, who stood through all of it very straight and very white by the dais, and who said not one word in her own defense, because there was no word to say, he did a thing more terrible than any punishment, and I think he knew it. He did not rage at her. He did not strip or banish or shame her before the court. He simply looked at her for a long moment, across the hall, and then he said quietly, so that the whole silent hall had to strain to hear it and therefore heard it forever. She trusted an animal to remember her more faithfully than she could trust her own household. Madam, she was right. And he turned from her to the business of the dog and left that sentence hanging in the air of the hall, and it was, I am told, a very long time before the Queen Consort was easy in that court again, and she never once from that day so much as looked at the gray dog in the gallery, and the dog, for his part, never once looked at her. Then the king came down from the dais in front of them all, and he came to the wall where we stood, and he stopped in front of Corporal Roland Thane. Thane stood at attention, eyes forward, as he had stood 10,000 hours in his life, and the king looked at him a while, and then he said, "They tell me you left your post, Corporal." "Yes, your Majesty, once, to follow the estate to the kennels. I logged the hour, and the reason, and I answer for it. They tell me you grounded your rifle, and let 4 men take the dog if they dared, with your hands open." "Yes, your Majesty." "Why?" And Thane was quiet a moment, and then he gave the king the same answer he had given me, more or less, which was the truest thing in him. "Because a man who fights can be beaten, and it is only a brawl, sire," he said. "And a man who will not fight and will not move and stands with his hands open cannot be beaten, he can only be murdered, and no one in that yard wanted to be the man who murdered the king's guard over the queen's dog. Standing still was the strongest thing I had. Your late queen taught me that, your Majesty, though she never knew she did. She once told me that disgraced men know the price of honor. I have spent 5 years learning what she meant. I think that morning I finally knew." I saw the king's throat move. Then he did a thing that is not in any protocol, and that they still speak of in the guardroom, though fewer and fewer of us are left who saw it. He took Thane's hand, the white-gloved hand that had held open in the kennel doorway, that Bracken had once rested his muzzle in, and he held it in both of his own, a king holding a corporal's hand before the whole assembled court, and he said, "Then she chose her guard as well as she chose her dog. You will not stand a corridor again, Corporal Thane. You will command the guard of my children, hers and mine both, for as long as you will do it, and you will teach the young ones what you learned in that corridor, because I find I want my house guarded by men who know the price of honor and not merely the word." And Thane bowed his head once and could not speak, and did not need to, and that was the whole of his reward, and it was more than a fortune. Bracken lived 3 more years. He lived them exactly as the late queen had asked, where the children were, in the reopened gallery with the sun on the floor, and the shawl restored to the back of the chair, growing grayer and stiffer and slower, sleeping longer in the warm squares of light, followed everywhere by a small boy named Bram who was no longer quite so small, and guarded, without any fuss made of it, by a captain of the guard who was never far from wherever that old dog chose to lie. He died on a morning in early autumn in the heron garden in the sun, of nothing but age and a long life fully spent, with his head in Malin's lap and Torrin's hand on his flank and Bram's tears in his rough gray coat. And I was there, and Captain Thane was there, standing a little apart with his eyes forward and his jaw set, guarding, to the very last, a threshold that only the 2 of us could see. We buried him in the heron garden, under the birds his mistress had loved, not 1 hour before his time, exactly as she had written it, and the king came out himself and stood at the small grave bareheaded, which is not a thing kings do for dogs, and did it anyway, because he understood better than anyone that we were not burying a dog. We were keeping a promise a dying woman had folded into a collar, because she could not trust the living to keep it for her. I have thought about that a great deal in the years since, being now very old myself and near the folding up of my own affairs. She was right not to trust us. Left to ourselves, we would have let the dog go not out of cruelty, most of us, but out of the ordinary cowardice of not wanting to make a scene over a small thing while the powerful smiled and called it mercy. That is how nearly every wrong in the world gets done. Not by monsters, but by reasonable people declining to make a scene. The whole of what saved Bracken was that one man declined to be reasonable. He stood in a doorway and he would not move, and he made the powerful pay in hours for every step, and he trusted the hours to somebody riding somewhere he could not see. And he was right too. The hours came good. They so often would if only someone would stand still long enough to buy them. People ask me, when they hear the story, what it was really about. A queen, a guard, a dog, they say. It seems a small thing to have made such a stand over. And I tell them what I have told you. It was never really about the dog. The dog was only how a dead woman chose to ask whether the house she left behind still knew the difference between what is convenient and what is right. For 9 days it looked as though the house did not know. And then a disgraced corporal she had mended with 2 sentences in a corridor stood in a doorway with his hands open and answered her, on behalf of all of us, that it did. That is the plainest and hardest thing I have witnessed in 51 years, and I have never needed to embroider it, and now I have set it down in my own hand, the way she set down hers. If it is ever contested, take it to whoever sits the throne, and tell them an old kennel-master swore it was true. He will remember why.